And the Shulchan Aruch says that a sukkah, that this is in chapter 633, the height of the sukkah, the laws of the height of the sukkah. It says a sukkah that's higher than 20 amos is puzzle, whether it's a large sukkah, whether it's a small sukkah, whether the walls go up to the schach or whether they don't go up to the schach.
All the individual facts, right?
So what that gives us is that we had discussion of the debate about a tall sukkah that possibly everyone agrees that it's kosher if the walls go up to the schach, or if it's it's bigger than dalet amos, bigger than 4x4 amos, or if it's bigger than 7x7 tvachim, and then maybe everyone agrees that it's kosher. Shulchan Aruch says no. Every case is puzzle, whether it's a big sukkah, whether it's a small sukkah, whether the walls go up to the schach, or whether they don't go up to the schach. It is going to be puzzle. So that means that we follow the opinion of Rava, who explained that a sukkah that's above 20 amos is invalid because it needs to be made in a more permanent way. And the sukkah is supposed to be a sukkah that's potentially a 7-day sukkah. And when you build a sukkah that's over 20 amos, it's not a potentially 7-day sukkah. It is a permanent sukkah, and therefore it has to be permanent. Otherwise, it won't be able to handle its height and its size. And therefore, such a sukkah is invalid. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins like Rava, and I see the Mishabur over here brings down all the other opinions of that we don't follow. In other words, this is excluding the opinion that says that the problem is there's not enough shade when it's too tall, so we don't follow that opinion. But if it was wider, then it would be kosher. We exclude the opinion of you don't see the roof because it's so high up. But if the walls would go up to the roof, that you would think would be okay. No, we don't follow that, and therefore it is always puzzle. Rather, we follow the sukkahs. That sukkah is diras arai. It has to be potentially temporary, and until 20 amos, that's when it could be temporary. And so exactly as we just explained it. Now, the Shulchan Aruch then says that that what it means 20 amos is the space until the schach. And if you want to get down to the nitty-gritty details, it's actually 20 amos of empty space would be kosher. And the schach is right above the 20 amos. That would be kosher. Above that is where it's possible. But you get up to 20 amos of empty space. In other words, the halal, the empty space, is even if the whole schach is above 20, since the halal doesn't have 20, it has exactly 20 amos of empty space. That's what's kosher. If it's a little more than that, that's the cutoff. So in other words, if you want to get down to the details, that the cutoff is a little more than 20 amos of empty space, and that's where you put the schach on top of that. That's where it's going to be a problem. Another law in Shulchan Aruch is something we're going to learn about, is if you could minimize the size by putting a platform on the floor, would that help? So we'll see that later in the Gemara. In the next chapter of Shulchan Aruch is chapter 633. 34. And this chapter talks about a sukkah that doesn't have 7 by 7, if it's smaller than 7 on 7. And this is where it does get complicated. Not just because not really the Shulchan Aruch, but the commentaries and dealing with the different opinions. And we've touched upon some of these opinions, but basically the Shulchan Aruch, it says a sukkah that doesn't have Zion al Zion, which is 7 handbreadths by 7 handbreadths. Handbreadths approximately 3 inches. So one opinion is 4 inches. So it's basically around 21 inches or by 21 inches or maybe a little more. Now, if it doesn't have that, it is puzzle, and it mentions that if it's a round sukkah, you need to be able to have a square of Zion al Zion inside the square. You need to be able to fit a square of 7 by 7. If we have any mathematicians, maybe Mordechai or I don't know if you fall into that category.
You said inside the circle, right? You said
yeah. So if you have a 7 handbreadths by 7 handbreadths square, if you have a circle sukkah, the smallest circle sukkah would be a circle that goes around a 7 handbreadth by 7 handbreadth box square. So the Mishnah Berurah calculates it to be a 29. Would that be 29 handbreadth? 29 handbreadth. What would that be called? Diameter?
The circumference.
Circumference. The circumference. I didn't learn geometry. Sorry.
7 times the square root of 2 of the diameter, and multiply that by 3 and a 7.
Oh, okay. So I guess Ezra's our mathematician today. So basically, it somehow comes to a little over 29. A little over, 29. That was his calculation. But basically, you need to be able to fit a square, and that is connected to what we were learning. That there is a debate in the commentaries. Do you need to have 7 by 7 solid handbreadths, or is it go by square footage? And if you could fit the square footage, and he obviously the Shulchan Aruch is paskening that we have to be machmir, either paskening that you have to follow the more stringent opinion, or being machmir, in other words, that we should follow that strict opinion. But basically, that's the accepted opinion in the Shulchan Aruch. Again, it's chapter 634, and it's paragraph 1, paragraph 2. If it's round, talks about in paragraph 2. And now,
what about a 6 by 8? A 6 by 8 is no good.
No, I'm not sure what you mean.
Instead of a 7 by 7, it's 6 by 8.
6 by 8. Right, correct. Yeah. Six handbreadths by 8 handbreadths. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't accept that way of understanding it. Right. In other words, the Shulchan Aruch says, no, you need to make it this way. Now, the case of a big sukkah is in the same chapter of the Code of Jewish Law, but it's in paragraph 4. It says if a person has his head and majority of his body in the sukkah, and his table is outside the sukkah, so he's got a big sukkah, but his table is right outside the sukkah. If he ate there, it's as if he did not eat in the sukkah, even if it's a large sukkah, because of this gezerah, this decree that maybe he's going to go and lean after his table. And what basically the Shulchan Aruch seems to imply is that it's as if he didn't eat in a sukkah, meaning that he doesn't even fulfill the biblical commandment. So it sounds like. And again, we learned about that there's a machlokes if you fulfill the biblical commandment and you just don't fulfill the rabbinic commandment. And and that seemingly was connected to a small sukkah that is only that's smaller than Zion al Zion. It's smaller than 7 by 7. That would be a case where, even though Beis Hillel says it's a kosher sukkah, Beis Shammai says it's not kosher, and according to some opinions, it had to do with this reason of maybe you're going to go after your table, and the table is outside the sukkah because it's less than 7 by 7, and there you had this logic of possibly if you ate in such a sukkah, it would not be considered a eating in the sukkah, even biblically, because it's called a dira srucha. It's called a lowly type of dwelling. It's not considered a sukkah, and you didn't even fulfill the biblical commandment. But when you start mentioning the gzeira, generally that sounds like it's a rabbinic decree. If it's a rabbinic decree, that seemingly would mean that you fulfill the biblical commandment, you just don't fulfill the rabbinic commandment. Now, here we're talking about a big sukkah, and here you have the logic of this decree. We're afraid of, going. Seemingly, all you have is this decree. In other words, you can't say, well, it's a dira srucha when it's a large sukkah. You can't say it's a lowly sukkah just because your table is not in it. So. And so it is interesting that we're saying that it's as if you didn't eat in a sukkah, and the Mishnah Berurah brings down that as long as part of your table is in it, it's okay. But if you but if your whole table is in the house and you're sitting completely in the sukkah, that's a problem. And even if it's a large sukkah, and for sure if it's a small sukkah, it's a problem. Because it's such a small sukkah, it makes more sense. You're going to lean towards outside, and some say for sure you don't even fulfill it at all. It's not considered a dwelling, and then he mentions if you have a sukkah in the field near your house, so you got to be careful on Shabbos if you didn't make an eruv. Okay, so that's basically the Shulchan Aruch. Now,
if a person doesn't own a table, or if a person's in a situation that he can't get a table, like God forbid during the Holocaust,
right,
if a person
right.
builds a sukkah but there's no table available,
right. So we spoke about that on Friday. That if you don't have a table at all and you're just eating in your sukkah without a table, it's not a problem. That's what we said on Friday. There is a whole Sharatzi in here that talks about it, but it's seemingly not a problem at all. And you fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah, no problem. But the case where your table is right outside the sukkah, that's where it's a problem. To the extent that it could be considered that you did not eat in a sukkah. It's as if you didn't eat in a sukkah at all. And it could be considered that you didn't even fulfill the biblical commandment. On the side, there's a commentary called the Biur Halacha, also written by the Mishnah Berurah and Shulchan Aruch, and he says, he brings down the Tosfos that we learned on Friday, that you're not even fulfilling the biblical commandment because the rabbis decreed and they decided that you didn't fulfill the mitzvah of sukkah. Now, there are opinions that it's only rabbinic, but the fact is you're going to have to, eat again in the sukkah if you want to fulfill the mitzvah of eating in the sukkah. Yeah, let's say like the first night of Sukkot, and you ate in the sukkah with the table in your house, that's a problem. Now he does say there is a argument if you say the bracha of Shehachiyanu the next time the second time when you eat in the sukkah. It seems like a machlokes, but nevertheless, the mitzvah of eating in the sukkah, he says you would need to do again, because even if you fulfilled it biblically, you didn't fulfill it rabbinically, and you'd need to eat again in the sukkah. So if your table is in your house and you're in the sukkah, that would be a problem, because it's possible that the rabbis did something interesting here and said, we are removing your fulfillment of the biblical commandment. Now, how do the rabbis do that? The whole discussion, and it's not really here. The discussion really is later in Tractate Sukkah, 20 something pages later. But the commentaries over there discuss this, and they say that a few reasons why the rabbis would have done that, and said you have not fulfilled the mitzvah of sukkah. One reason is because it's considered a mitzvah haba ba'avera. It's a mitzvah that's coming with an avera. Another explanation is the rabbis have the ability to remove something from the Torah, yesh koyach lachachamim biyad chachamim, to uproot something from the Torah. Or another reason is that this is, and this would apply to a small sukkah that is called a dira srucha, so therefore it's not even fulfilling the biblical commandment. Or it's considered part of hefker, bezdin hefker, that bezdin says your sukkah is considered ownerless, and therefore, if you don't own the sukkah, it could be a problem of fulfilling the mitzvah of sukkah, even though we hold that you don't really have to own it. At least the simple understanding of Shulchan Aruch is you don't have to own it, but it could be that Beis Shammai, who holds this opinion, holds that that you do have to own the sukkah, or possibly that if might get this one, but it could be that if you have a sukkah where the table is outside the sukkah, is right outside the sukkah, that the rabbis made it hefker. In other words, they made it ownerless. And if you sit in that sukkah, you're considered like a goslin. So basically, however you learn it, these are complicated ways of figuring out how the rabbis, or why the rabbis would have removed the fulfillment of the mitzvah of sukkah from you. Yes, Ezra.
So this entire inyan about the table, that applies to 7 by 7 or daled al daled, or what, that we.
How does it? It seems that it applies even to a big sukkah. In other words, if you have a big sukkah and you have, and that's why I'm going to look into this with the Jeffries case of where there's a roof on part of your sukkah. How does that work? If your table is placed over there with food, the food is on that table. In other words, you don't have a table in the sukkah. You only have the table which is by the area that has an overhang. Would that be included in this decree of being in a sukkah that has the shulchan outside, that has the table outside of the sukkah? Would that be prohibited?
I've always been told that, because I also, the original sukkah that I built, used a portion of an overhang that I had, and normally anybody that would sit under the overhang doesn't satisfy the requirements. And so normally what we asked is the women to sit in that particular part of the sukkah. My new sukkah, of course, doesn't include the overhang, so everybody who sits in the sukkah is actually okay. I've always been told an overhang or even a tree over your sukkah, invalidates anything that you do within it, because you're not under the schach. The schach itself is underneath the tree, and that would be problematic.
Right. So it sounds like your sukkah is fine, in the way it was also fine, because your table is in a kosher sukkah. Your chairs you have some chairs that are not in a kosher sukkah, but that's for the women. or people who don't need to sit in a sukkah. So it sounds fine. Problem would be if you put your table in that area where, if you put the table in the area where no one's allowed to eat, that would be problematic, possibly. Again, I'm going to have to look in the Piskei Teshuvos. I have another sefer that I have to look in. There must be some heter for this, but it doesn't seem so simple. Now, the Mishnah Berurah did give a little leniency, and he said that if part of the table is in the sukkah and part of it is in the house, then it's okay because there's no decree. But the problem is if the entire sukkah is in its entirety. So I'm not sure where you draw the line. It gives you a little room for a little leeway over there. So how much of the sukkah could be, in the sukkah that's kosher, and how much of it. So if you have 3 inches of the table in the kosher sukkah, and 9 inches that aren't, is that good enough? Because even if you lean over it, at least you got 3 inches that you possibly are leaning that are part of the kosher sukkah. It doesn't really give us a clarity on where to draw the line. But definitely it seems from here that we should try to be careful to have a table, that the table, if you have a table in your sukkah, that it should be in a kosher area of your sukkah. Yes, David.
What if a person, for whatever reason, he can't fit the table in the sukkah? So what he does is he declares the table hefker.
Well, really, that's not going to help, because the question really is if he's sitting in a sukkah or not. So if the table is ownerless, it's not going to, that doesn't give him any leniency. The trick is that he removes the table from being even near the sukkah, and he eats on a chair and on his lap, and he's not using a table, and then he's eating in a sukkah. Yeah.
But the chair acts like his table, so he's fine.
Either a chair that acts like his table, or his lap that acts like his table, or the floor that acts like his table, or he doesn't have a table, he's just holding a bagel in his hand. But however he's doing it, there's no table, so we're not afraid he's going to lean over his table. So that's what it comes out. So this is even in a large sukkah, so it's problematic. Okay, well, anyway, that's so far as what we found. Again, there's a whole discussion here if he fulfills the mitzvah biblically, even though, because maybe this is only a rabbinic decree. But as we saw, there is a way of learning it that it's even biblical that he's not fulfilling the mitzvah, and therefore, I mean, not that it makes much of a difference, because even if it's rabbinic, you still have to fulfill the mitzvah properly. So but it does seem to have very practical applications, because many people have these overhangs, and this might be something that we might have to publicize this. Okay, so anyway, let's continue where we're holding over here. We are on Daf Gimel. We turn the page to Daf Gimel Amud Beis, but we're going to go over it now. So let's start on Gimel Amud Aleph, page 3a, Tractate Sukkah, page 3a on the bottom of the page. I'm going to pull it up here on the share screen. It's 6 lines up from the bottom. It's this brisa that talks about a house that doesn't have 4x4. So let me pull it up here. The first.
Rabbi, is it 4x4 amos?
Yeah, 4x4 amos, correct. Yeah. Okay, I just got the Safaria. Let me share screen. We can begin. Okay. Okay, so we're starting here about Man Tana Laha. Man, do you see it? Everyone see it? Yeah. Man
Yeah,
Tana
I
Laha
see.
Tana Rabbanan. Who was the author of this that the rabbis taught? Bayas Shein Baraba Amas Alava Amis, a house that doesn't have 4 by 4 amis cubits, which we said is either 6 feet by 6 feet or close to 8 feet by 8 feet. Different opinions. So such a house is patur min mezuzah. It's exempt from putting up a mezuzah. A house, well, really, that would even mean a room, because a mezuzah applies to rooms. A room that doesn't have dalet amis al dalet amis would be exempt from a mezuzah, which applies often to closets and other small rooms that would be exempt from a mezuzah. Now, if the room is leading to a room that's obligated, so it could be you look at the other room, the room that it's leading to, not the room that is less than dalet amis. So you could have areas where it's less than 4 amis by 4 amis regarding mezuzah, but it's leading into a room that is 4 by 4, and the mezuzah would be then need to be put possibly on the side of the entrance to the large room, and would be obligated in a mezuzah. So it's like, which room do you go by? In other words, if there's 2 rooms, one next to the other, one room is 4 cubits by 4 cubits, one room is less than that. It really depends on which room is the people going from and to, and that would be the obligation of a mezuzah would be based on the room you're entering into. Now, so it's exempt from a mezuzah, umin hamaika, from the makkah, putting a fence around the roof. If a roof doesn't have dalet amis by dalet amis, that means you have a house that has a flat roof, of course, a tilted roof. You don't need to put a fence up because it's not an area that people will walk on. But a mica that is a flat roof, in other words, a house that is a flat roof needs a mica, needs a fence around it. And only a house that's dalet amis by dalet amis that has that size is considered a house. Smaller than that is not considered a house. And when it says in the pasuk that you have to put a fence around it, it mentions the word house. And we spoke on Friday about the issue of I mean, even if it's smaller than that, flat roof, maybe you should put up a fence anyway. Seemingly, you don't want to have any danger involved. So I mentioned my own thought. That the fact is that there might be another mitzvah to put up a fence because of ushmartem ma'oid l'nafshei seichem. You have to guard yourself from danger. But the mitzvah of Micah of putting a fence maybe wouldn't apply, because the Torah specifically uses the word abayis. Special law about a house needs a fence. Now, anything else has laws of danger that apply in all cases. Anything that's dangerous, you have a mitzvah to protect. So that might fall into the other category, but not the mitzvah of bias. Anyway, just that's my thought. I did see in one of the commentaries over here says a different answer. He wants to say that it's really very uncommon to even to fall from a roof, and therefore, if the Torah says you have a mitzvah to put a fence up, it would only you're really not obligated to without the Torah's law for danger, because it's not dangerous. Because people who are standing on roofs, they know to be careful. It's so rare. But he says because the Torah obligates you for a bias, then for a house, then you need to. But if it's less than dalet al dalet, then you fall into the regular category of something that's not common. Then you wouldn't need to be concerned about it. So anyway, that's another way of learning this. Another option. Okay, so 7 here. Something just went wrong. Okay, fix this. Okay, so then we continue that it's you put it from the Micah. The Einai Matami ben Negoyim. Such a house does not have Tumas Negoyim, which basically means that it doesn't is not checked for tsaras. So there's laws about a house that has impurity, leprosy, and we learned about it in Parshas Tazria Matzaira when it talks about leprosy of the body. It talks about leprosy of the clothing. It talks about leprosy, different parts of the body, the hair, where you have hair, a place where you don't have hair on your body. And it also talks about having a nega, tsaras, leprosy in your house. And the law of leprosy in the house only applies if it's a real house. It has to be 4 amos by 4 amos. If it doesn't have 4 amos by 4 amos, it's not metame ben negoyim. It doesn't fall into the category of tumas negoyim. Now comes the next law: it doesn't become a absolute purchase when it involves a such a house if it's in a walled city. Normally, if you sell a house in a walled city, so you have 1 year to redeem it, and if you don't redeem it, it becomes absolute. The sale is absolute, and you can say goodbye to it because you won't get it back. The other guy did very well on his purchase because he bought it and you thought you're going to redeem it in a year, and in the end you missed out. So that law doesn't apply if it's a small house that's less than 4 amos, 4 cubits by 4 cubits, and it basically is considered like a field instead of a house because it's such a tiny house. It's not even, we don't call it a house. So it doesn't fall into that category, and he can redeem it until Yovel, until the Jubilee year. And if he doesn't redeem it until the Jubilee year, it'll return to him automatically at the Jubilee year. So that's a pretty good thing for the seller. Then comes the next law of Ein Chayzrin Olav Me'orchei Amlachama. There's a special law that a person who goes to war, that they make announcements. A person who just built a new house and he didn't inaugurate it, so the law is that he goes back. He goes back because of it, because when they make that announcement, and if he built a house that's doesn't have dalet amos, 4 cubits by 4 cubits, he is not exempt from the war. He can't go back home and say, oh, I just built a house. I didn't inaugurate it. I got to go back home. Nope, doesn't work because it's such a tiny house. It's not called a house. We don't consider it a house, and it has to be a bias chodosh v'loy chanocha. You built a new house and you didn't inaugurate it, and this is not called a house. Then comes the next law that ve'ein ma'arvin boy, and this gets complicated with the laws of Eruv. People get nervous when you start talking about Eruvin. It's the laws of Eruv, which have to do with the laws of Shabbos, that when you have courtyards, that you have houses opened up to courtyards. So the way it works is the people can't carry in the courtyard, even though the courtyard has a fence around it. They can't carry from their house to the courtyard unless they make an Eruv. And the Eruv that they make will allow them to take from their house into the common public area. And they gather, they take bread, or matzah generally is used, and they put it in a basket, and you put it in one of the houses, and it's considered as if they all live in one house. And but a house that doesn't have 4 by 4 is not obligated to give bread in order to be able to carry into the common area. This applies also in hotels and in apartment buildings. This concept of Eruv, that even though you have a string around the house, or there's a wall around the house, or a wall around the building, you have the building itself is a wall. But nevertheless, because there's common areas, that's very similar to a public domain. Because of those common areas, you would need to make an Eruv, a special rabbinic law of how to make it that it's considered to be not a public domain, but more of a private domain. So
They
how do
don't
you?
have to contribute, but are they counted in the Eruv?
They are. That's what it seems that they are. They are counted. If I'm not mistaken, it seems that they are counted part of the Eruv. Um, now, the understanding is the understanding is that they would be allowed to carry into the chutzir, even if the other people don't make an eruv. They sort of have a leniency that they could um, they make their own eruv and they're not like connected to the other people. They can carry into the into the into the chutzir and and to their house, to their hut, I should say. Um, or maybe they don't. I don't think they need to make their own eruv. They are basically considered part of the chutzir. See, the way it works is, I once had a shaila. This is the story. I once had a question because I made a Shabbos. This is Robert knows about this, and we made a Shabbos dinner in a common area in a development called Point East. And the question was, do we need to make an Eruv over there because we're carrying, yeah, we're going to be doing a Shabbos dinner there, carrying Siddurim and food and plates and, wine and whatever we're carrying around over there. It's a common area. You're allowed to carry in that area without making an Eruv. The law is that the only Eruv you really need is if you're bringing something from a house into that common area, but to carry in the common area itself is not a problem. It's bringing something from the house to the common area. That's where you need an Eruv Chatzeros. So in that scenario, we did not need to make an Eruv because we were not bringing anything from any of the houses or the condos into that public area. So this person who lives in a house that's not considered a house, it's considered a little hut. It's like he's living in the courtyard. So he's part of the courtyard. Seemingly he doesn't have to do anything unless the art scroll says something different. But as far as I understand, he doesn't need an Eruv at all. Now, then comes the next case, and the next case is that ve'ein mishtatfin boy, and he doesn't need to do a shituf mavoi. So do I have it here? Ve'ein mishtatfin boy, yeah. That's right here. Let's make it the ain over here. Ve'ein mishtatfin boy. They don't. This house is not part of the eruv shitufei mavois, which basically eruv chatzeros is joining courtyards, and that you need bread for. Eruv shitufei mavois is joining alleys, joining the alleyway, and that basically you don't even need bread for, and they're this way you can have different courtyards carry to other courtyards. In other words, normally the Eruv Chatzeros is only to carry from the houses into that courtyard. What about carrying from one courtyard to another courtyard? And there's a mavoy, there's an alley in between, like a dead end type of street. So that would apply this concept of a shituf mavois, where they join together and make it considered like it's one big happy family. And for such a thing, the courtyards participate in, and the house or courtyard that has a house that's only 3 amos by 3 amos, it doesn't have 4 amos. That courtyard doesn't need to participate in this shitufe mavois. It's such a small it's a small house. It's not considered really a house, and it doesn't make a problem. Unless there's a bigger house also in that same courtyard, then it would be a problem. But it doesn't ruin anything, and it's the shitufe mavois doesn't need to include that in its gathering together of all the courtyards. Now, this is an interesting issue, because what happens is, if one of them doesn't participate, it could ruin it for the rest of them. That's really where you have a problem. And you need everyone really to participate. And if someone doesn't want to participate, it could ruin it for everyone else, that they won't be able to carry. And this creates issues. So they're like here in Florida, they have an Eruv around Miami, a large area of Miami Beach, I should say, not Miami, but Miami Beach. Large area has a Eruv. So in order to be able to make such an Eruv, they need to have like a shitufei mavuos. They need to include all of these buildings and so on. So the way they do it is they get permission from the mayor of the city. So like Rabbi Weberman, Olav Shalom, used to rent out. He would pay $1 for, or whatever he paid, a few dollars for 99 years of he has access rights over the public common areas in the entire city, or something like that, the entire city of Miami Beach. And by doing that, he basically has the right over all the chutzers, all the courtyards, and this way basically can provide the whatchamacallit, provide the whatever food is necessary in order to make it considered a good Eruv. So he includes that in the Eruv, and that's the way it's done. Generally, you don't have to do this in a hotel, although there is discussion about it in the Paiskim. You go to a hotel, how are you able to carry in the common area? Do you need to rent that area? And if you do want to be machmir and do that, the way to go about it would be to bring a bag of challahs. You have everyone in mind, and so even though you're not going around knocking on doors and letting people participate, but you basically rent, and you have to pay $1 to the manager and say, for technical reasons, I want to have rights over the common area. And if he trusts you that you're not going to start kicking people out of the common area because you bought rights over it, so then you can make a Eruv Chatzeros and be able to carry. But for some reason, it's not officially, it's not really such an issue. There's definitely some room. There's reasons why a hotel maybe doesn't need it, and you don't need an Eruv over there if you want to carry in the common area. At least that's what I'm told. It's complicated laws, the laws of Eruvin. I know maybe Ezra wants to share with us. I think, Ezra, you told me that you've gone through Eruvin. I think. You want to share anything about that, or no? It's not true? Oh, okay.
I did go through Eruvin, but not really. I don't have anything to share.
Oh, okay, no problem. Okay, so in any event, you can't put an Eruv in the you don't need ein manichin b'eruv, but that's the next line. Ein manichin b'eruv. The next point is that you don't put the Eruv in that house that is opened to the chutzner, that house that it doesn't have dalet al dalet, doesn't have 4x4. So you collect all the houses collect. They collect something, food from, or bread from all the other houses, and then you put it into one of the houses. Now that house that you put it in, it shouldn't be the house that's the dalet that doesn't have 4 cubits by 4 cubits. Now the next thing, and we turn the page now.
Rabbi, does being on a ship, is that basically the same thing as the situation in the hotel?
Oh,
Even though you're not sitting, even though you're
right, you want to carry in the common area.
Right.
Yeah, I would think it's probably similar to a hotel. Again, you have to ask a Rav to be sure, but seemingly it's like a hotel. So where it really applies is to condos. Condos, you do have this major issue, and that's where many condos, they make their own eruv, especially in New York. They make an eruv for the condo, so you could carry in the common area. Now, the Gemara continues and says that we're on page 3b, 3b1, if you have the art scroll, I'm sure. So the top line over here is, if you don't make this house, it doesn't become a ibur, which literally means a pregnancy between 2 cities. And basically, there's laws of going outside of the city limits on Shabbos. And the only way you could go out of your city limits on Shabbos, because once you leave your city limits on Shabbos, you only get 2,000 amos, which is 2,000 cubits of walking space, which is less than a mile. So if you're in like you're taking on Shabbos in somewhere out there in the fields, in the forest, in the wild, you have a very limited area where you could walk to, because there's a law of tchum, and if there's no habitation, there's no houses in the area, you're basically limited on all. You're limited to where you're dwelling, and you get 2,000 amos from in all directions, and that's it. So you have less than a mile in this direction, less than a mile in that direction, and so you're pretty limited. If you planned on taking a nice long walk on Shabbos, you can scratch that idea, because you're not allowed to. But the thing is that if you're in a city, and the city has like a little house at the end of the city, so that house could combine 2 cities together, and it could become like a city is pregnant, and then you get to walk through the whole city. And for various reasons, there's areas in New York where people could walk for miles and miles, and you can even walk from Brooklyn to Manhattan, and for some reason you're able to go that far, even though it's 2 different cities and you're walking over a bridge. But for various reasons, it somehow is not considered going beyond the tchum. But other areas you have to be careful about. If there's an area where there's no houses and you're walking very far, that would be out of the tchum. That's why people, they say they got stuck on the highway for Shabbos, and they I walked 15 miles to get somewhere, to get to a hotel or somewhere for Shabbos. Not so simple, because it could be that it's outside of the tchum, outside of the limits of how far you're allowed to walk. And it has to do with on Shabbos, and it has to do with the camp. The camp of the Jewish people in the desert was this size of, was a certain measurement. And beyond that measurement is called, you're not allowed to go out of the camp. So that was it's connected to the traveling in the desert, when Jewish people left Egypt and they were traveling in the desert. So it's there was one of the laws is lo yetze ishmel kaimai, right? People weren't allowed to go out of their area of dwelling, and out of the camp. And so that applies in cities. You're not allowed to leave the city, but there could be a way, if the city has a house that could be considered like making the city pregnant, and allow you to go to the next city. And so it has to be a house that's at least dalet al dalet, 4x4. So if it doesn't have dalet al dalet, then you won't be eligible to use this house as an avenue to include another city in your city. Now, this law applies to Yom Tov also. Some people think, oh, it's only Shabbos. Not true. It applies to Yom Tov as well. It doesn't only apply to Shabbos. The same laws, even though we call it Tchum Shabbos, but it applies to Yom Tov as well. And there is a little trick of how to get a little extra space, and that is called making an Eruv to Tchum, Eruv Tchumen. Mute everyone here. So there is something called an Eruv Tchumen where you could leave some measurement of food and somewhere in the middle or towards the end of your 2,000 amos, towards the end of your 2,000 cubits, and then consider it as if that's your dwelling place. So let's say you really want to go north. Normally you only have 2,000 cubits, which is, let's say, 4,000 feet. It's like 3/4 of a mile. So you want to go 1.5 miles. So what do? You put this food item at 3/4 of a mile away from where you are, and you leave it there before Shabbos. So it's considered as if you're dwelling at the halfway point, which really is the end point of your tchum. But because you're putting some food there, it's as if you're dwelling there. That's the place of your dwelling. And then you could then go another 3/4 of a mile beyond that, because that's your dwelling. And that dwelling makes it as if that's where you calculate all your calculations, which also will limit you from going in the opposite direction. So if you want to go north, you've now given yourself, instead of 3/4 of a mile, you've given yourself 1.5 miles. But guess what? Now you can't go south. Normally, you could have gone south 3/4 of a mile, and you could go west. But now you've changed your whole direction, and because of that, you're at the tip of the your southern limit. So you can't go any more south, but you can go north because you've made a Eruv Tchumen where you've decided on where your official dwelling is. Now, they go through a calculation over here that if there's 2 cities and each city gets a 70 2/3 amma, a little extra, that we consider as sort of like a pregnancy of the city. So if there's a house in that area, which basically means that if you add the 70 amos 2/3 for 2 cities, you get that 140. There's able to be 140 amos, 141, because 70 2/3 plus 70 2/3 comes to 141 and some change. So what happens is a third. So if there's a house like towards the end of this city, and even if it's after the city, but it's within the next 70 amos, 70 feet, so then that could attach the next. It'll allow you to include the next city as well, and they could all be the second city as well could be considered part of your city, and then you get another 2,000 amos outside of the second city. So anyway, the house that's there has to be at least 4 by 4 amos by 4 amos, otherwise it's not calculated. Then comes the next city, the next law. That the brothers and the partners don't divide a house if they inherit a house that's 4 amos by 4 amos. It's not, or less than that, it's not able to be divided. Also, when you have partners, there's laws about partnership that certain times we allow one partner to force the other partner to divide the merchandise, divide the property. Why do we do that? because someone wants to, there has to be an option, a way for them to get out of this. So we allow one to force the other one to sell out, either buy me out or I'll buy you out. There is such an option. That does apply to property and when you have partners. And so if a house doesn't have 4x4, then that would be a case where you can't force the other partner to either to divide it. You can't force them to divide it between the two. Maybe you could do either you buy me out or I buy you out, but you can't you can't actually force him to divide it because it's not divisible. It's too small. And we'll soon see a little more about these laws. Now, the Gemara says, Lema, this is why we brought this, is because the Gemara says, Lema Rebbe he Rabbanan. This sounds like this follows Rebbe's opinion, not the rabbis, because Rebbe held about the 4x4 rule by Sukkah, that a minimum Sukkah is 4 cubits by 4 cubits. Then the rabbis held, no, it's 7 handbreadths by 7 handbreadths. Big difference. So this whole teaching of the Brisa that we just read, everything is 4x4. It sounds like Rebbe. It must be Rebbe. The Gemara says, no, I feel with him or Rabbanan. You can even say it fits with the rabbis. Ad Khan until here. Loi Kamri Rabbanan, the rabbis didn't say Hasam El Linyan Sukkah, only over there regarding Sukkah, the law about the 7x7, because the Diras Araihi, because it has to be a temporary dwelling. I believe I'll be biased, but regarding a house, Diras Kevahu, that it's a permanent dwelling. If the Rabbanan Maidu, even the rabbis agree, but here it has to be a house. The rabbis agree that if it has 4x4, the Yisbei Arbamas Al Arbamas, it has 4 amas, 4 cubits by 4 cubits. Daira Beyinchi, people will live in it. The Eloi, and if not, if it's so smaller than that, like Daira Beyinchi, people don't really live in it. They might, temporarily pop in, but it's not really a dwelling. And so that's the Gemara's answer that knocks off the assumption that we had that maybe that maybe Sukkah falls in the same category, and the people who hold this thing about 4x4, they're the ones who hold about Sukkah 4x4, and the other rabbis who hold about 7x7 by Sukkah, maybe they would hold different laws regarding all these cases. And the answer is no. Everyone agrees by all these cases it needs to be Daled al Daled, needs to be 4x4, and now the Gemara goes through each of them and the reasons for it and so on, and does it how exactly it applies. All right, I guess we're going to stop here. Sei gesund, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Okay.
Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.